Welcome back. If you're new, welcome in the first place. I'm joined today by somebody who needs no introduction, so we won't give him one.
None needed.
No, it's Pete
I would hope people
Pardo.
know who I am at this point. If not, hi
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah. If you're watching music on this channel and you don't know Mr. Pete Pardo, let's give him an introduction. Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility.
Nice vocal effect there.
That's what the echo is meant for, isn't it? Yeah. So it's worth getting this microphone just for that. So yeah, Pete, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
This
Nice
is
little companion piece to the
yeah
yeah.
part part two or part zero, depending on whether or not this goes up first and we consider it a prequel. Regardless, a companion piece to what we're doing on Pete's channel, Sea of Tranquility. You might have heard of it. Where we're ranking the studio albums, 10 favorites of Barclay James Harvest, the incomparable but somehow unknowable band of the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and still going in one incarnation with John Lees.
Yep.
But we both feel that their live output is just as important, certainly in a couple of places, as their studio, and it's massively important to the story, and more importantly, to their sound and just how we listen to them. So, Pete, do you want to just tell us your story with Barclay James Harvest, or how you got? Did you hear the live first, or was it just picking up another album and then you tried live? Because it's a double live album from the 70s. It's always going to be worth a shot.
Yeah, honestly, Davey, I don't really remember what my first. I remember like my first couple of Barclay James Harvest albums. And I started buying them probably in the early 90s because I really started heavily getting into a lot of the second tier prog bands right around that time. I was a big metalhead throughout like the late 70s and all through the 80s. And when the 90s came about and grunge got popular and alternative and all that kind of stuff, I turned to other things at that point in time because all my favorite metal bands were either trying to fit in or going away or whatever. So I just said I need to discover something else out there, and I got the prog bug big time. So I had never heard of Barclay James Harvest before then at all, and somehow I don't know, I think I was buying CDs from some prog vendor. Again, I don't remember exactly how I found out about them, but I did find out about them, which is a good thing. So I went and scooped up a few of them right off the bat, and I got these wonderful little sets. I started buying these. These were very easy to get a hold of back then. These are all the Polydor sets, and then you got the One Way Out collections, which you had the 2-in-1. But at the same time, when I got those, I had heard that this live album from 1974 was an amazing collection of a lot of their great songs. So I remember liking these albums a lot, and then listening to this and I'm like, oh, but wow, these songs sound a little different here. And funnily enough, before we did the ranking the albums show of the studio albums on SOT, I would say for the last decade, Davey, this is the one I always reach for. I mean, these are all great albums, as I've rediscovered recently, because I hadn't listened to any of these in well over 10 years, that the studio albums are really magical. But I think for so many years, I just was like, well, but my favorite versions of some of these classic songs are on this. Or even, and this is to me, this is a almost like greatest hits of the band live from the first part of their career. So the pre-Polydor years, right? So the Harvest era. That's kind of what this is to me. And we're going to talk about live tapes as well. It's almost like this is their Farewell to Kings by Rush, and All the World's a Stage, or live tapes is their All the World's a Stage.
Each one
right?
ends an era and they move on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what it's like. And a lot of the versions of these songs on these live albums are immense, like really good. So, we joked at the end of the SOT episode that, like, well, we gave you our number ones and twos, and that'd be a great place to start. But then, honestly, if you really think about it, well, if you really want a good place to start, get either one of these two live albums. or get them both, right? It's like, that's a really good place to start. But like I said, for years, this is anytime I wanted to hear Barclay James Harvest, I'd look at all these. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, you know what? I'll just pull this one out again and listen to this. And it's maybe lazy on my part, but we're going to talk about why this is so good, right?
Exactly. Lazy or sensible in a lot of cases. Maybe for variety, lazy, but it's just untouchable in a lot of ways. So you mentioned there a bit of the backstory. They were dropped by EMI. They'd never taken off to any great extent. As we mentioned on Sea of Tranquility, they would on the mainland of Europe, but never at home and never in the US. So EMI didn't really know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Polydor snapped them up thanks to Eric Stewart of 10cc fame, kind of making the inroads. And then Polydor make a deal where, okay, they're in debt with EMI. What if we clear the debt, but we get the rights to release their older catalog live? So we don't get the rights to the catalog, but we get the chance to do it live. And essentially, as you said, give new life to these songs. And hopefully we can, because this is an era where you can actually have a hit single that's a live or a live record be a hit. And then hopefully that will break them through. So the material's there, but maybe the publicity hasn't been, or the management structure, etc., etc. So let's try it with the same material, but in a live setting, because it's 1974 and that kind of thing could still happen. And it worked in a certain way. It was their first top 40 album in the UK, but it was number 40, so it wasn't too high up those top 40, but still better than not hitting them. And yeah, they ditched the Barclay James Harvest Symphony Orchestra, as they were called, which had been all over the first four records. They couldn't afford to pay a full orchestra at the moment.
Yeah.
So what's better than the full orchestra? One Willie Wilson home as your keyboard player. And boy, does it show. Because if this album had another name, it would be Mellotron Marinade, because his
Mellotron James Harvest, basically.
it's just everything about everything that should be orchestral and is on the albums, and a lot more besides big extended parts, is Mellotron madness all over it. It's from the 1974 shows at Drury Lane and Liverpool Stadium. Famously, the tapes didn't work. It's something that's plagued them throughout their career, having to redo things. And in the Berlin concert, half of that didn't record correctly, and blah, blah, blah. So they had to re-record some stuff later on at a different gig, but it wasn't done through overdub. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of a few summer 74 gigs. But boy, does it come together. And they weren't happy with the final sound. That is something that you hear mentioned quite a bit, is that the sound's not 100%. I don't know. I quite like the muddiness of this record. I think it adds to the whole piece and just the pure forward attack of it. So
that's why I think, the two records that we picked to talk about today, this and Live Tapes, they sound nothing alike.
Yep.
And even though there is some crossover on the track listings from the second one to this, this one to the second one, for the most part, this is very raw sounding, and this is a snapshot of all those great tracks from those years. And whereas the Live Tapes album is much cleaner sound, really great sound, I would add. And you do get some crossover, but they also throw in a lot of other of their great tracks from the next bunch of years. So, we're looking at 74 and 78, I think Live Tapes was, right? So 4-year period. So, but yeah, I mean, I there's a charm to the muddiness and the rawness of this album. It kind of, to me, it sounds like, you remember, like, back in the day, I mean, you're a little younger than me, so maybe not, but I remember back in the day, we would stay up late and we would watch, like, Don Kirshner's rock concert, or you'd see like these like yes songs, or Neil Young's Live Rust, or Rust Never Sleeps. You'd see the films on like USA Network or something like that. They always had like a very raw sound, because you were watching these really cool concert clips on a shitty television, right, with shitty sound. And there was always this kind of like, everything sounds like it's breaking up, but you're watching and you're like, you can't take your eyes off it. Every time I listen to this album, I almost picture that I'm seeing that like old, almost like VHS style footage with crappy audio, but yet it's so amazing that you love it regardless. And that's kind of it's like almost like a home recording, like one of the best bootlegs you'll ever hear. That's like what this album is. But it's like, but you hear every instrument, right, in all its raw, ragged glory. And Yeah, there's no orchestra, so it's not as refined as the studio tracks, but there's that Mellotron that's just like, and again, for those of you who don't know, a Mellotron is basically just an old-fashioned tape machine. It's not an actual keyboard like it's just you have keys, but every time you hit a key, it like triggers a tape which has recorded sounds on them, and it's very temperamental. So, and it kind of sounds it like when you listen. I don't know, Davey. When I listen to this live album, I don't think I've ever heard a band utilize so much Mellotron in a live setting as this. And it just sounds so raw and on the verge of, okay, one of those tapes are going to break
Yeah.
and rip at any second, right? But and John's guitar playing. If you think, we talked about it on the episode on SOT about John's fuzz guitar tones and how savage they sound on record. You ain't heard nothing yet till you hear it in this live setting. I mean, just amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. And the vocal harmonies, they nail it all on here. All of it.
Yeah, it's a dirty down and out version of Barclay James Harvest, but still Barclay James Harvest.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the feeling of it being like almost something you're watching on a bad VHS. It was, of course, recorded in part, which is on the Caught Live DVD, which gives us a couple of tracks from this. Unfortunately, other tapes were lost. They also recorded Rare Bird that night, who were the support act at Drury Lane. And you get this is a great DVD for historical purposes. It's even worse quality than the album itself, but it's still stunning. I mean, to actually see them doing the songs that were a few of the songs that we get to listen to here, it's magical. Just the red light hitting Willie, and you get to visualize it. And they're not the most dynamic band in terms of moving around and jumping up, and they're not that kind of band at all. But and then there's all sorts of extra stuff here from like promo stuff from 75 and whatnot. But yeah, great DVD for fans. Is just to see a little glimpse of this era, because that's really rare. I mean, Sabbath, for example, have got one live recording of the 70s that even exists, never mind is out. So it's not taken for granted that these bands were recorded in video. So great stuff. So I mean, it's one of the albums where I loved the first few albums, and eventually got around to getting the live album, and it was this one from 2005, and that came. We mentioned on your Curse of the Collector show a few weeks ago, signed stuff, and that came signed by 3 members. So signed by Willie, signed by John, signed by Les. Mel unfortunately passed away, but then he passed away in 2004, Mel Pritchard. But especially with them being a splinter band, it was nice to get that at that point. And then I picked up the vinyl later on, and Esoteric have done a remaster since in 2013, I think, which is as clean as this album's ever going to sound, but I don't want it to sound any more clean.
And I'm wondering if I need to upgrade mine, because this is obviously the old VSOP CD release.
Mm-hmm.
I've had this for close to 30 years, so I'm sure. Is there anything extra? Any bonus?
No, that's the one thing. Live tapes is expanded. This isn't. There's nothing more to include. But the difference.
How about your booklet, Davey? Because I got basically this. That's it.
Yeah, sonically first.
Whoops.
The difference between the sonics on the vinyl, for example, and then the CD are just night and day for the remastered CD. So I can only imagine the same must be relatively true for the original CD update. The booklet itself, you get all the lyrics, which you don't often get on live albums. That's kind of nice to get.
True. Yeah.
But you do get things like the ticket stub from the actual venue and poster, and then you get a 4-page essay by what's their name, and then you get why is that not the gatefold?
Oh yeah, 100%.
That should absolutely be the gate, because the gatefold is it's the lyrics on the gatefold of the actual vinyl. So come on, that should be.
Yeah.
Anyway, the essay itself is by a couple, 4-page essay, who also did literally the book on Barclay James Harvest. And look at that for a tome. It's 500 odd pages. Keith and Monica Demom, they do all the liner notes for the reissues from Esoteric as well. So yeah, Keith and Monica are the one resource who get published on Barclay James Harvest, because they also did the that series of books. I think Martin Popoff's done a few of the all tracks, all albums, those kind of affairs.
Yeah.
So yeah, Keith and Monica's book on Barclay James Harvest goes from literally the inception right up to 2013. So it's essential for big fans. This is great stuff. Great stuff. So yeah, do you want to give us your thoughts on this first album then, 1974 Live?
I mean, how about this track listing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of plays like a greatest hits at this point in time, right? You know, Summer Soldier, Medicine Man. I mean, Summer Soldier's right off the bat. What do you hear? Those stabbing guitar leads and then Mellotron. I mean, it's so dramatic. Medicine Man is great on here. Crazy City totally rocks. You got After the Day, the great 1974 mining disaster, Galadriel's on here, Negative Earth, She Said, Paper Wings, 401, and Mockingbird. You really can't make up a much better set list than that. You really can't. And the sense of drama and the supreme musicality of it all is consistent throughout the whole thing. And like I said, it's like these essentially are like the definitive versions of so many of these songs. And it's like in that, I think I've listened to this so much over the years and so many more times than the studio albums that when I hear the studio versions, I'm almost expecting to hear stuff that I know so well from the live versions. But yeah, this is a great place to start for anybody on this band, because it gives you just a great snapshot of some of their best songs from the early days, but played in a way live that just kind of elevates the studio versions of them. So yeah, this is a pretty magical album. Really, it's one of those, I think, live albums. You know, we always talk about the 70s being the glory decade for live albums, for rock music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all have our favorites. We always talk about, you know, the Made in Japans and the Strangers in the Night and Live and Dangerous and Get Your Ya-Ya's Out and Yes Songs, and, you know, and they're great live albums, landmark live albums. Why is it, though, that we always kind of forget to talk about this one? Because then when we do talk about this one, we realize why we don't talk about it enough, right?
Yeah. It's almost like it's I mean, I'm sure commercially they would rather we all talked about it, but it is kind of nice to have this hidden gem, you know. It's not
It's
for
almost like a
everybody.
little secret, right?
Yeah, it's like the He-Man Woman Haters Club, you know, that's the name of the Little Rascals Club, folks. I'm not advocating violence towards women. That's the name. But yeah, it is like this secret handshake or something, isn't it? Oh, you like Barclay James?
Pretty much.
Do you like the live album? Well, it's like you love the live album. Do you want to come over for dinner? We'll become friends. I'll get my mum to cook something. So yeah, I mean, it's a real document of the times, as you say. It feels like 1974. You can practically smell the tobacco smoke filling up the air.
Yeah.
To start, what a brave start as well, with Summer Soldier. So it doesn't. Okay, we'll build up to something like something. It just throws you straight into the deep end with Summer Soldier, which obviously comes from Baby James Harvest to the last from EMI, and immediately Willie Wilson Holmes' Mellotron just roars the album into being. It like conjures it up, and it's also different from the Baby James version. And it's got a more prominent role, I think, this song in the live set of the time. It doesn't feel just like an album track or anything. It feels like, oh, this must be an opener. This is something they're really pushing up front here. And it just smokes with John on guitar. You said Willie on the Mellotron, the temperamental Mellotron, as we know from stories of how they would just give up the ghost and tapes would just rip, snap left, right, and centre. But it's a stunning version of Summer Soldier, and goes right down to Mellotron, just with John's voice and Willie on the Mellotron just singing alone. It's just gorgeous stuff as well. So it's one of those majestic, epic, but also gorgeous at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, that's epic and gorgeous is kind of like a great way to describe almost everything on this album, right? These are just these songs that speak to you from their catalog, and you know, Galadriel is so good on here as well. Mm-hmm. You know, Galadriel is one of those songs that's only 3.5 minutes long. It's like, I want that one to be longer. It's like, no, don't go yet, right? It's like, it's just so good. And I will say, you know, a lot of times on these longer-ish live albums, you know, you get to the back end, and you know, maybe some people are like, I kind of have a little fatigue towards the back end, but man, Paper Wings, 401, and Mockingbird, to finish out the album.
Unreal, isn't it?
Doesn't get much better than that, right? It's
Unreal.
like, no, you can't, don't go home yet. You got to stay for Mockingbird. You got to stay all the way to the end, right?
Yeah.
But that makes sense because it's like, if you go to see them live, right? Mockingbird's one of their signature tracks, right? So you have to play it last. It's like, you can't go home unless you hear Freebird or Smoke on the Water or, whatever, right? So, yeah, but I think it's the album and, the track list is sequenced just really, really well because you have like your share of rockers in here and they're mixed up on the more symphonic emotional pieces. And it just works just really, really well. And yeah, that guitar tone from John throughout, really good, really,
Brutal,
really good.
absolutely brutal. And I love the way that they've changed things around. So it isn't just here's a live version with where you can stick some audience members clapping on and call it a live version. They take Medicine Man and that now transitions from Summer Soldier straight in, and it becomes one big piece almost, where it's this massive 20-minute epic, even though they were never even on the same album. Stunning link up, drum and bass all over the place from Mel and Les, who are just a great rhythm section, a phenomenal rhythm section. Brilliant playing for all four, just gets you absolutely pumped. And as you said, John's amps must have been smoking at points, and Medicine Man in particular on there. Galadriel was gorgeous. So it shows that, okay, we're not just being ferocious because we're live here. We're not just doing an album of absolute rockers or anything, and we're not just ramping everything up. Galadriel still slows it down, and it takes the same instruments from the album, but somehow just beefs it all up. It's all, it doesn't feel like there's not a softie on it to put George Lamiism on it. It's gentle, but it's not a softie in it in any way, shape, or form. Same as Great 74 and Mining Disaster. It's quieter than the rest of the album, but it's a change of pace from what comes before, which in that case is After the Day. It follows up After the Day.
Yeah.
But it just feels like a necessary change of pace and a calm down before another storm. It doesn't feel like here's a ballad or anything like that. It doesn't feel as cynical as that. It just feels like sensible sequencing.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
I mean, Crazy City isn't much longer than the studio. That's probably the closest one in terms of length, but it's much more furious, much more aggressive. I'd say After the Day is one of my favorites on the record. This is just the Willie Wilson home album. I mean, John Lees is amazing on it, but Willie just gets. I mean, he replaces an entire orchestra, so of course he's going to stand out quite
pretty
a
much.
bit.
I mean, that's the crazy thing about it, right? I think if you want to hear what a Mellotron can do in a rock context, this is it. This is the blueprint for it. I mean, is there any better live album featuring the Mellotron that's ever been released? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's one of the signature great Mellotron albums of all time.
Yep, there's individual songs from other bands, there's individual live pieces, but I can't think of one live album where it's just Mellotron madness from start to ends and everything in the middle. And then even songs like Negative Earth, it takes that moody track and gives it a real atmosphere and tension because of that kind of claustrophobic sound that the recording gives it, because the slight lack of quality gives it a little bit of an advantage in certain ways. And then you get that amazing run at the end, one of the best four track runs on any album, live or not, where it's She Said, which if the studio version's amazing, then this is just sent from above. So loud in the mix on that Mellotron, and nothing else is quiet to make up for it. They're all just playing it as loud as they possibly can. It's insane. So for a band who can do pretty pastoral, they're deafening. I can only imagine what the decibels must have been like in Drury Hall that night.
Yeah. This to me, this recording here rivals some of the, and we're talking about the same time period actually, some of the classic King Crimson recordings from the same time period. So for those folks who are familiar with the Great Deceiver box set from King Crimson, which has all those live recordings from the the Starless Bible Black and Red era, and that's kind of what you're going to get here. whereas the Mellotron is enormous. The guitar tone is ragged and jagged and loud. Everything is loud and it's just ferocious and it's raw. That's probably because I would compare this to anything, any live recording you're going to hear from the Moody Blues, right? You know, like the Moody Blues have that one live album from a little bit earlier than this, obviously, which is really good, but it's not this at all. This is a totally different beast. I would say if you're used to some of those King Crimson recordings from the early mid 70s, you're going to really want to hear this if you haven't heard it. If you love Mellotron, you love loud, raw guitar tones, but this kind of what's great, always great about King Crimson, not that this sounds like King Crimson, it doesn't, but the kind of yin and yang between this really quiet parts and more loud, raucous, complicated, and dissonant stuff. Whereas this doesn't have the dissonance. This is like these gorgeous arrangements and melodies mixed with this loud symphonicness, right? But this is much, much more rocking and raw than the way they do this on the studio records. So, but there's still that kind of light and shade, light and dark thing that they have going on, but it's different than King Crimson's delivery of light and dark, right? But the intensity is very similar. I think there's like a feel. I don't know. It may not make much sense to people kind of watching right now, but if you go and you listen to this album, you'll get it. I think you'll get it. There's a raw energy, and Davies used ferocious a couple times. That's really what it is. Even though this is gorgeous stuff, but it's just so in your face and so like, I mean, live. It's really live.
Yeah, I can actually imagine this music being a bit overpowering for some people if they're maybe a bit emotional, because the emotions are there. It's so a lot of heavy music or loud music, they kind of forgo the emotions to all right, let's just rock this one up a little bit. This somehow manages to be incredibly beautiful at the same time as incredibly powerful and intense. It's a real chemistry, a real alchemy that I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it.
They're using certain things and it's conveying that message, right? So the vocal style and vocal tones are one thing, right? And then John Leese's guitar tone is another. I mean, he's a guy, he's not a flash guy. He's not a speed demon, but he's a guy, he uses like things like fuzz and treble to his advantage, and he's bending notes and loud volumes, right? Feedback, and that's how he gets you right here.
Yeah,
I mean, and then you got the Mellotron on top of it all. You know, Mellotron can sound as somber and haunting as any instrument ever created. And so you mix all these things together, and like you said, sometimes it's so emotional that it hurts, and it might shock people at how much this stuff, these songs are going to just totally rip into your soul in a good way, though. In a good way. And but it's using all these little elements together make it what it is, I think.
And John's guitar tone is ferocious on the records anyways, we said. But on here, I mean, if he was doing guitar stabs on the records, then here it's like a decapitation at points. He's just, it comes in and it's like an assault, and then he runs away again. It's brutal at points. Which
his notes are like breaking up. That's how much saturation and how much gain is on them. But it's not like, you know, he's not using fuzz like a Tony Iommi would back in the day or anything like that. It's different, but similar. And again, you know, we're talking 1974, right? So amp technology and whatnot, a little bit different back then, but you hear, if you're someone who plays guitar, plays an instrument, you know about this, you know about gain and how sometimes the best sounding guitar tones with a lot of gain is where you hear the notes or the chords and it sounds like it's breaking up. You know, that's his tone on this album. It just sounds like it's on the verge of just splintering into a million atoms or whatever, right? It's quite good, and it's the fact that he was able to achieve that throughout this whole recording is just incredible.
And that version of For No one of his best songs, John brings in wah wah that wasn't on the original version, so it starts to play around with effects, as you say. It's quite different. He's playing very 74 instruments, but a different style, so you wouldn't confuse them, as you said, for Iommi. You wouldn't even confuse them for Fripp. You wouldn't confuse them for Crimson, despite, I think, some commonality in some of the more pastoral stuff that the bands do or have done in the past at this point. But there's a divergence, I think, because they seem to come, Barclay James Harvest come from much more of a pop-oriented point of view, even if it's not a pop song they're playing, whereas there's always that kind of jazzy background to whatever King Crimson are doing that isn't present here.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, this band, when you really look at them, and especially the studio albums, there's a lot of pop and folk influence in their music. There's really none of that here, right?
Yeah.
This is taking that and saying, okay, we're making a rock live album.
Yeah.
This is 100% rock here. It's a great 5 out of 5 star classic.
Yeah, if we've got a double live album in 1974, then we better put our best foot forward and try and be a rock album, and that's exactly what it is. And as you said, that version of Mockingbird, the minute it hits in, we talked on your show, the minute the dun, 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 it starts to hit in, the audience lose their shit. It's already a classic at this point, by the sounds of it. So the audience just absolutely go mental. Everything being so prominent in the mix gives a totally different vibe. And then when that hits into the na 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 na, oh gosh, I don't know whether they cry or punch the air or maybe both at the same time. It is the most bizarre feeling. John and Mel were going absolutely mental on their instruments. Willie's not stopped going mental the whole time. Les isn't exactly a slouch on the bass himself. It just hits me every single time. Just essential live album of the 70s, folks. So we can't recommend this highly enough, I don't think. Yeah. But then,
not only did they release that one, they got another one that's worth your time, right?
So, as Pete mentioned, in 1978, but recordings from 77, I think, they have an attempt from Polydor, because this wasn't released in Germany and they'd started having big hits. There was an attempt from Polydor to, okay, let's see if we can cross them into other markets. So they get the Live Tapes album up and running. But the original idea was that this was the album that was supposed to help them crack America, which obviously didn't happen at all. So originally it was going to be a lineup of Crazy City, Medicine Man, Rock and Roll Star, World Goes On, Child of the Universe, Polk Street Rag, Mockingbird for No One, Hymn for the Children, One Night Jonathan Suicide, which is quite different to the version that you get on the end album. But they decided, because they lost the US distribution, no point in ripping off our fans by having the same songs again. So we'll just have a couple of crossovers. There's a few more on the Esoteric reissue, because they're both expanded, both discs. So 2 CDs set for anyone watching. But they essentially wanted to do a cleaner version. So if we're starting to potentially have hits, we're having them on the continent, and we're not writing off having them at home, and indeed potential America, we probably need something a bit cleaner to be in the shops and available, a double live record that people could pick up. And that's pretty much what this is. It's a redo of the idea, but with more of a catalogue behind them, so they can have a clean live album with their up-to-date sound to say, this is who you've missed out on so far. Please go back and check the albums.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. And it's a gorgeous sounding live album. Yeah. Whereas this is kind of raw. That is not. And I understand why they wanted to do something at that time period, because live albums here, especially because they're going for the North American market, were huge at the time. You got Frampton Comes Alive, Kiss Alive, all these other albums, and this should have been a big hit here. I mean, there's some really, really nice versions, some classic songs on here. I mean, Child of the Universe is stunning on here. So good. Rock and Roll Star is really good. We talked on the other show about the Poor Man's Moody Blues, which is basically a weird sort of, it's not really an homage. It's more like, well, since everybody calls it the Poor Man's Moody Blues, we're gonna do a joke song where we're gonna mimic the Moody Blues, right? But it's really good. It's really good. It's basically their Nights in White Satin, right? But I know the Moody's didn't really care for that too much, unfortunately. But you have Mockingbird is on here as well. It's amazing. It's earlier in the set as opposed to all the way at the end, like on the other one. Crazy City's also on here. Really good. There seems to me on this album, like they consciously said, all right, we're not going to stretch these songs out as much. We'll keep them a little bit more honest with the original studio versions, but they sound terrific. They sound really terrific. Him is also great on here as well.
Yeah.
And that's all the way at the end of the original release. So yeah, I think this is a great sounding live record. If we didn't have this, we'd be pointing towards this as probably the gem live album in their catalog. But there's other ones which Davey will talk about at the end. But yeah, this is excellent. Excellent, really good.
Yeah, I mean, you get Child of the Universe has got this kind of spacey introduction now that technology's come on a couple of years from where we left them on the last live album. John's voice just instantly sounds terrific. It's a bit more full. He's a bit more mature with the voice now. So is Willie as well. Willie's voice has become less tentative as the years have gone on. But a little bit of reverb added to it. Just how I like my live album, just a little bit of reverb, not as much echo as I put on your introduction, but just a little bit of reverb just to let you know it's not the studio cut, as if you'd mistake them. And then when Woolie's Mellotron hits in, you think, oh, I wish we could have just had every song recorded live in that first decade, to be honest, because they all seem to pop. None of them sound worse on the live, not one. They all sound better.
Rock and roll too. There's a lot more. He's using a lot more different keyboards on this live album,
which you can
a lot more synths, obviously. So it's not as Mellotron reliant as the first live album, which it's just it gives this album. And I think that's the reason why these are good companion live albums to each other, because this one is so Mellotron dominated, and this one has more synths and piano and organ in addition to Mellotron. But it's not like that's all you get.
But you can kind of see there. There's Willie there on the.
Yeah, he's surrounded by all sorts of stuff.
He's boxed in there, isn't he? And I love
that's his little Patrick Moraz. Pose, right?
And he's very. Don't come too close, fellas. Leave me. But yeah, I love this as well when bands used to do that a lot more, where they give you their full kit. Here's the microphone that we use. Never mind, just here's the guitar that I'm playing. It's full kit. That every single bit of Mel's drums is talked about, from the different toms, all the amps that Les and John are on, great stuff. So it kind of gives you that, here's what you should be saving up for, kids, if you want to sound exactly like them, minus most of the talent. But I mean, yeah, so Willie's on Hammond C3, Mellotron Mark III and 4, ARP Pro Soloist and String Ensemble, a Mini Moog, a Lawrence Audio piano, and then they used an H&H amplification. It must be an octopus.
Yeah, that's what they did back in the 70s. Like, you look at all those guys. They Wakeman and Emerson and Mraz and all those guys. Kerry Minier from Gentle Giant. You look at any live shots of them, and they got shit all around them. Eddie Jobson. I mean, all these guys.
And yet he'd never be in the conversation as much as any of those guys, apart from maybe Kerry Minier.
Yeah.
Never in the conversation. And Willie doesn't put a note wrong as well. It's so bizarre to me that every part of them is underrated. It's not just like, sometimes you hear an underrated band and it's usually just, okay, they've got a good singer, but maybe the band weren't going to make it. Every constituent part seems underrated to me. Great bass, great drums, great guitar, great singing, great Mellotron. Every single part of it was there. The albums were there, the audience weren't.
I think, unfortunately, like Wooly and Mike Pinder both got kind of pegged as, they're the Mellotron guys. You don't need any talent to play Mellotron. But there's a lot more there than that.
Yeah. And he's playing Hammond elsewhere. It's not as if he's just hitting the tapes. He's playing Hammond elsewhere on it. As you said, we get a kind of, at this point, a greatest hits. So we get Poor Man's Moody Blues, which they mention by name, and it gets a big pop from the audience even at that point. So it's, relatively speaking for them, a well-known track. Mockingbirds, again, they just let the live audience soak it up the minute they realize they're hearing Mockingbirds. That's the opening notes of Mockingbird. And it's different on this version because you obviously get to hear a lot more of the separation between what they're doing. So it isn't straight head mono in your face. There is more separation. You can hear left, right, center and things. And it gives it a more separate feel, a slight distance, but it's no less intense. It's no less fascinating. It's no less powerful, most importantly. It still hits you like a freight train every single time. It's just different. I wouldn't want to lose either version if I had to choose, to be honest. And as you said, there's other tracks like Taking Me Higher, Suicides, Crazy City, Poultry Rag, which are different from the other live album. They're from the newer albums. We get brilliant new arrangements, much more grand and intense takes in the studio versions, fuzzed out guitar all over the place. A track like Jonathan, which to me is the definition of it's an okay song in the studio cut, and then becomes just epic live, just blows out of nowhere, and then him to end it all, which is great because they end on an epic, but not a sonic epic. They don't try and do Mockingbird from the last album again. They say we're going to try something a little bit more subdued here, but no less powerful for it. So him just brings everybody along for a very different kind of closer than Mockingbird did in the last one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it's another well constructed set list, I think, and what I like about it is these two are companion, even though there is some crossover here. These two are companion live albums, and they work really well together because they sound different. They have a lot of different tracks. It's 4 years later. This is really, really well produced and just sounds sonically so amazing, whereas the other one is so amazing, but it sounds completely different. It's great stuff here. Great stuff.
So as Pete mentioned, we'll have a quick. We'll not go over everything because later in their career, they do live albums more than studio stuff when they become splinter projects. But some of the great ones from later on, even as late as 2012, John Lee's Barclay James Harvest at the Metropolitan Studios is a CD DVD set. Revival from as early as 99, bit different. BBC recordings mostly. The radio broadcast, this is a great double disc set. Absolutely stunning. Radio broadcast 74 to 76. Very similar lineup. It almost goes disc one way and then back down the same track list and reverse it almost for disc two, but you don't really mind when you're getting double versions of Crazy City or She Said or something. That'll do, Peg. Thank you very much. And then things like Glass Dot was a really popular one from the 80s as well. But I'd suppose the biggest one, apart from these two that we've talked about, for many reasons, biggest in every possible term, is A Concert for the People, Berlin, from the early 80s. So it's after Willie Wostenholm leaves. We're not going to give it as in-depth a review here, just a few brief thoughts. This is the concert they played to at least 170,000, apparently as many as 250,000 people. So that's a good day out. A quarter of a million people in Berlin at the Wall. So they've got John doing a lot more on this record, of course, because Willie's not here. But they do have stand-ins, Kevin or Colin come in to play keys on it. But John's certainly taking the lead on it. And then we kind of mentioned it earlier, things always go wrong for Barclay James Harvest. So only an hour of the 2.5 hours that were recorded for it were actually usable. So it took them 2 years to actually get it out. So it was recorded in 80, didn't come out till 82. And unfortunately, that means that this, which was a live film made of it, only has an hour of footage, whereas they did film the whole 2.5 hours, but an hour and a half of it was unusable. That said, it's still an hour of Barclay James Harvest doing Berlin, Lovin' Is Easy, Mockingbird, Sip of Wine, Nova Electro, I can never pronounce it. In Memory of the Martyrs, Life is for Living, Child of the Universe, and Him, which that'll do. One of our, how many times have we just said how great Eagle Vision were for that kind of release over the years?
I know.
But yeah, another example there. But the album itself does give you a much expanded version, so it gives you the full set list as was intended, though they did have to go back to the studio and tart it up quite a bit. And I think you're a fan of that one as well. Maybe
Yeah,
not
I actually
as
only
much.
have the DVD. I only have the DVD. I never got the actual CD of that. So, but yeah, it's cool stuff. And what's nice is that you have some songs in the set that aren't on the other two, right? So again, it just adds another companion if you're into collecting Barclay James Harvest. I really like Memory of the Martyrs on there, I think, which is really, really great. Yeah. And it's good to have like Sip of Wine and Nova Lepidoptera, or whatever the hell you say it, right? It's good to have
science fiction is what I go with here, but yeah, Nova Lepidoptera.
Yeah, but you miss Wooly, but at this point in time, it's amazing how they got two guys essentially to replace him, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But
to mention as well, if people don't know, Willie's solo catalogue has also been compiled with Willie Wolstenholme and Mastoso, his solo works, which some of this has been reviewed on Sea Tranquility's webzine over the years when it just came out, so piece by piece, because only one of these is from quite early. One of them is from 1980, but the rest is from the 2000s. So it's Willie just after Barclay James Harvest, and then decades after Barclay James Harvest, after going back to them again for a little while with the John Lee's splinter group, if you will. And then John Lee's solo album, which is A Major Fancy from 1977, this Japanese one, which rather oddly comes with a bonus disc full of great stuff, amazing stuff. And then a 3-inch CD single as a bonus on the back.
Wow.
A 3-inch CD single, yeah. All the kids in the playground must have, oh, there's a new John Lee CD single, 3-inch. Oh, great. What a bizarre little extra. And it's just one of the album tracks on a CD single that's 3 inches. It's Child of the Universe. He redoes that for the album. But yeah, this is great stuff. It's not as good as Barclay James Harvest. It's not as rocky as you'd think. You'd expect a John solo album to be. He's going to rock it. Yeah, it's got Rod Argent on it, which is pretty cool. So it's he basically just substitutes Rod for Willie and does a Barclay James Harvest kind of album, which that'll do.
Well, it's a good guy to ask if you want to do that, right, Mr. Argent?
Not a bad pick. Yeah, he'll do. Yeah. He'll do. So yeah, that's the end, folks. We've kind of done our marathon, the Barclay James Harvest, and
in a Barclay James Harvest weekend, right?
It has the harvest time again.
Harvest time, that's right.
So Pete, thanks very much. And normally at this point, when anybody's on, I say, would you like to promote your channel or something? Do you have a channel on YouTube, Pete, or
Yeah, it's called Comic Book Geezers.
Comic Book Geezers.
Yeah, I got two channels. Sea of Tranquility, look us up here on YouTube. Sea of Tranquility Prague. If you're into the music side of things, we cover all kinds of hard rock, heavy metal, classic rock, progressive rock, jazz and jazz fusion. Sorry for the dogs barking in the background. And then my sister channel, or other channel, if you're a vintage comic book fan, you can see from up here, I got lots of comic books. Me and my co-host Wild Bill, we talk about cool comics from Marvel and DC from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff going on over there as well.
We talk about Danny O'Neill. Just a name that I think I know. He did Batman blue suit a lot, if I remember right.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, yes, see, I don't know a little tiny bit. Folks, thanks very much for watching. I was just going to do your outro there for some reason. For Pete Pardo, I can't steal outros. Folks, thanks for watching. The usual comments, complaints, put them in the comments below. And we'll see you on Pete's channel for either part 2 or part 1 or part 0 or part 19 of this, however you want to look at it. But the studio version.
The studio version. We'll put the links down below so you can go check it.
So, where you can see what we think of the studio. Basically, it's all good. It's all good. If it's 1970s Barclay James Harvest, it's all fucking good.
Yes, that is true. I will agree with that.
Yeah. Pete, thanks very much.
Thanks, Davey. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Cheers, folks.